Um, Unfortunately, it's already 10 minutes past the class, and still it's only 5 of the students who are now present in the class. However, we're not going to wait any longer since we have to finish off on time as well because of the iftar time. So we'll just start with today's session, which is about the political and legal system in national environments. Can everyone hear me properly? Okay, great. Today's session it's pretty much similar to what we went through in the previous session. However, it'll cover more aspects to it. Last session was mostly into legal matters, but this time we are adding the political factors as well. So we're going to start with the definition of country risk and what country risk is. It's the exposure to potential loss or the adverse effect on company operations, basically anything that the company did not expect to see in its operations, and the profitability caused by developments in a country's political and or legal environments. It's also referred to as political risk, where each country has a unique political and legal system that may pose challenges for companies' strategy and performance. Well, it's clear that every company that is planning to move on to another country, they will be exposed to the risks that are prevailing and that are existing in that country. As you can see in this diagram, there's 3 aspects. If you want to consider it somehow, like all of them can be somehow considered as the country risk, which you can see down here. However, it tried to split them into 4 different categories, which is the commercial risk, which has to do with the competition and all these other things that the company will need to face when they move to another country. They have the currency and financial risk, which has to do with the fluctuations of the currency and basically the currency changes. And we have the cross-cultural risk, which has to do with the different cultures of the people as compared to the culture of the mother country where that company is actually coming from. And finally, we have the country risk, or as we call it, the political risk, which actually is consisted of the government interventions, the protectionism of the government, and barriers to trade and investment. So basically, it's the limitations that are imposed by the government. It has to do with the bureaucracy, the red tape, the administrative delays, and the corruption. Red tape refers to the red line that the government draws in terms of, for example, what goods are allowed to be sold, what goods are not allowed, and etc. Like, for example, one of the red tapes in Islamic countries, for example, would be the selling and the trade of alcoholic drinks. Why? Because in Islamic countries, religious values prevail, and as per Islam, alcoholic drinks are not allowed. So hence, it will be a red tape and a red line for the government that is drawn against the companies that want to trade in this specific good. Lack of legal safeguards for intellectual property rights. This is what we discussed a few sessions back, where we gave the example of China. If a company like, let's say, Apple wants to move into China, and if some company from China just copies whatever Apple is making, there is no laws or regulations that will protect Apple against that company who's breaching the intellectual property rights, because that country does not have such law. And we have the legislation unfavorable to the foreign firms. Sometimes the law is already there, and that law is not in the favor of that company who wants to move in. I remember we also gave this example as well when we said that in some countries, the multinational companies will not be allowed to take back and to take out the profit that they are making from that country, and they will be forced to reinvest whatever profit that they're making within the same country. So that will be an example that falls under this category. It's a legislation. It's a set of rules that is not favorable to the foreign firms. Then we have the economic failures and mismanagement, which is pretty much clear, like what we had as the economic crisis, like whichever country, whichever company that was doing its operations and carrying out its operations in a country that faced the economic sanctions very harshly, for sure that company suffered as well. And we have the social and political unrest and instability as well. Political unrest and instability, you can see the best example of this case, like countries that are experiencing revolutions, for example, like what you have in Syria or in Egypt. There are examples of social and political unrest. Why? Because companies that are working there, they really don't know what they should be expecting next. And of course, you know that all big companies, their success depends on their predictions and what they forecast for their, like, let's say, for the next quarter or for their next 6 months or next year. What gives rise to the country risk? We want to see what are the factors that will increase and trigger the country risk. One of these is we know that the immediate cause of country risk will be the political and legal factors. However, these two are not the only factors that are the causes of country risk. There's also the economic, social, and technological developments that may be the root cause. We have laws that may be unexpectedly strict, and political legislative actions which may harm the business even if they did not intend to do this in the first place. Like maybe countries did not intend to create a hard time for the companies that are moving in, but eventually their set of strict rules and regulations will eventually hit these companies, and it will have negative impact on their operations. And it also gives the example of China, where in China the government censors the materials that criticizes its government. And a company like Yahoo, for example, they must monitor the information that appears on the website so that the government of China will not shut down its operations in China. And also the last factor will be the weak law enforcement, which is also often a factor. This makes sense because almost all countries, they do have proper rules and regulations. Of course, they are different to some extent, but at the end of the day, there are rules and regulations that are made by experts, made by, like, let's say, proper legal advisors or, let's say, lawyers or whatever. However, you can see that the problem is not with the rules itself. The problem is where it's how these rules and regulations are being enforced and practiced within the country. We can see this chart. It's about 2004, 2005. I'm sure that all of you agree that it's no longer the case like this, because it's listing the countries as per the level of risk from up to down, and it has Iraq #1, then Zimbabwe, Argentina, Venezuela, and all the way down. However, I'm sure that nowadays we will have countries like, let's say, as we gave the example of Egypt or Syria or other countries that are involved in wars and, let's say, internal chaos, or even government transitions, like, or revolutions or whatever. These are all factors that will contribute to the level of high country risk in these set of countries. We will look at the definition of political systems and legal system. Political system is a set of formal institutions and departments that constitute a government and how these groups interact with each other. They include the legislative bodies, the political parties, lobbying groups, and trade unions. We all know that the power within a country is usually divided into 3 different parts. It's the legislative branch, it's the administrative branch, and the judiciary. The political system will refer mostly to the legislative branch and the administrative branch. And the next one, which is the legal system, will usually refer to the judiciary, where it's a system for interpreting and enforcing laws and regulations. It includes the institutions and procedures for ensuring order and resolving disputes. For example, the High Court, if you're giving the example of Australia. or the majestic court in, like, let's say, UK. These are all different examples of institutions where legal issues are being practiced and enforced. Three major types of political systems. We have the totalitarianism, which we will give the example, like we can see like countries such as, let's say, North Korea or even China in the past. These are countries that are experiencing totalitarianism. Then we have the socialism, which socialism to some extent is similar to democracy, which we will explain in the next slide. And it says that these categories are not mutually exclusive. This means that it's not like a socialism, let's say, political system. It's 100% socialism. They may be, for example, a democratic country, but at the same time, to some extent, they are practicing socialism or even totalitarianism as well. And here we have the example of each of these political systems. Like, for example, totalitarianism, we have Cuba, we have North Korea, we have some African countries like Eritrea, Libya, Sudan, and Zimbabwe, for example. Then we have socialism found in countries like Bolivia, China, Egypt, India. As I said, like China in the past was an example of totalitarianism. Now it falls under the category of socialism. And we have the elements of democracy in countries like Australia, Canada, Japan, and etc. Okay, totalitarianism. The government in this type of political system, it controls all the economic and political matters. It's either theocratic, if it's based on religion, like, for example, Saudi Arabia, or secular. Like it may be a totalitarianist government which is not based on religion, as, like, for example, let's say North Korea. A state party is led by the dictator, and membership is mandatory for those who want to advance. So basically, if you're not part of the government, you have no chance of advancing. Because it means that if you're not part of the government, you don't have much space to grow. And the power sustained in these countries is by secret police or the propaganda and the advertisements and regulation of free discussion and criticism. The example of totalitarianism, as we discussed, like China, for example, until the 1980s, which then it went through some transitions and some changes, and now it's become a socialist country. Or even Germany until 1945, Soviet Union until 1991, and Spain until 1975. Today, some states in the Middle East and Africa employ totalitarianism, which we discussed, and we mentioned some of the names. And many ex-totalitarianism states have much government intervention, red tape, and bureaucracy. Of course, China is an example again, because it was an ex-totalitarianist country. However, even today, although it's a socialist government, but still there is much government intervention when it comes to even to business operations. There's many red tapes and bureaucracy involved in its operations as well. We move to socialism, which is the capital and wealth is vested in the state and is used primarily as means of production for use rather than for profit. Socialism countries, as you can see by its name, it gives the importance to social and to groups and to the society rather than individuals. Group welfare outweighs the individual welfare. Government role is to protect and to control the basic means of production, distribution, and commercial activities. The socialism occurs in much of the world as social democracy. As we said, it's pretty much similar to democracy, and that's why we even have the term of social democracy. And countries that practice such type of political system is like Western European countries, Brazil, and India. You have frequent government interventions in the private sector. So still we have the government interventions even in socialist countries, as we discussed in the previous slide. And corporate income tax rates are usually higher. So this is an example of government interference. So basically the government, it doesn't leave everything up to you. If you're a successful company, you will have to pay higher tax. So the government somehow has a hand in your business as well. Then we move on to the democracy and the two features of democracy, which one of these features is the private property right, which is of course favorable to companies which have high-tech products, for example, which is very important for them, for their rights to be protected by that country where they're operating their business. The ability to own property and assets and to increase one's assets by accumulating private wealth. Like you see in countries like for example, let's say Cuba, it's not like you can just add up your money and the more money you gain, you can buy more houses and run more businesses. No, that's not the case. The government does not allow that, and everyone, as I said, they have a limited space for growth. Whereas in democracy, that's not the case. It doesn't matter how much money you earn. You can become Warren Buffett and you can live with other people in the society. You can even become like, let's say, Bill Gates and just grow your business and accumulate your money and buy different assets and properties, and no one is there to stop you. The property in this example that we are saying, it includes the land, building, stocks, contracts, and patents. It encourages initiative, ambition, and innovation. Of course, it brings the encouragement. Why? Because if you are working in a country where let's say the government does not allow for you to grow, you don't have much ambition in order to grow, because you know that at the end of the day you're going to be similar as the rest of the people, and you cannot have more wealth as compared to the rest. And of course, we have limited government interference in democracy. The government performs only essential functions that serve all citizens. Basically, they create the framework for people to live in a lawful society. They will perform their functions in, like, let's say, in national defense, in maintaining law and order, foreign relations, and providing basic infrastructure. So it's like they give you the piece of land, they give you the soil, but they don't force you to, like, let's say, plant the seeds of wheat, for example. You can plant whatever you want. You can do whatever you want with your land. What they do is that they provide you with the land. They'll give you the resources that you will need to do whatever you want. So that's like one of the main features of a democratic country. We move to the democracy's link to economic freedom. Of course, democracy has a lot to contribute to economic freedom, where we don't have this in the other two political systems. Why? Because as shown in the evidence, democracy, it gives greater economic freedom and it leads to higher economic living standards. As we said, the economic freedom, if you remember, I think it was in our second session, if I'm not mistaken, we said that in order to have the economic freedom, all companies should be free to offer whatever they have and at whatever rate they want to offer. The government should not interfere. The government should not draw red lines in terms of what is the maximum price, what is the minimum price. It should be free. If that's the case, it will lead to a state that companies will be offering better quality at lower rates in order to sustain and in order to be able to live and stay in the competition that exists. The economic freedom flourishes in systems characterized by free market economics, strong rule of law. This is really important because, as I said, like almost all countries in the world, they have strong rules and regulations, but it's all about the enforcement of these rules and regulations. So if you have proper enforcement of rules and regulations, your country will become like a Scandinavian country, where in the previous session, if you remember, we said that like Russia is one of the riskiest countries in the world in terms of doing your business, and Scandinavian countries like Norway, Denmark, or Iceland, or whatever, these are countries where there is less risk. Why? Because the enforcement of law is very strict, and it's to the favor of the companies who are trying to run their business legally, and I mean, as per the rules and regulations of the country. And of course, in democracy, we have minimal government intervention, even in business sector. Centrally planned economies, which is similarly what is practiced in totalitarianism countries and to some extent in socialist countries, is the state that is responsible for making all the decisions. What goods and services the country produces, quantity of production, prices at which they are sold, and distribution. So as you can see, everything is controlled by the government. So not much is given to the hands of the businesses to manage themselves. The state owns all the wealth, land, and capital, and allocates resources based on which industries they want to develop. So this is what you can clearly see in a country like Cuba, for example, because that is the case. No individual is allowed to own any land. So all the land, even if you buy the land, the original owner of the land is the government. So if one day the government comes and they ask you for your land, you have no option. You cannot show a contract and say that, okay, this is a piece of land, and as per the contract, it's under my name. That's not the case. It is owned by the government only. These type of economies, they were common in the 20th century. Sorry if you can just mute. Thank you. This type of economy was in the 20th century, so it's like about 100 years ago. So nowadays, you hardly have countries that are practicing this. I think that even Cuba today, I'm sure that they're still a totalitarianist country, but I think they are somehow moving toward. They somehow succeeded to move to a socialist state, especially since the new president has come, and because of the different visions that he had as compared to the previous leader. Central planning is less efficient than market forces in synchronizing supply and demand. Of course that's the case, because supply and demand does not have any meaning in these type of economies. It's only about the decisions that is made by from the higher authority, and it has to be implemented. Today, many countries exhibit some characteristics of command economies, like China, India, Russia. Well, of course, we know that everything, it cannot be, I mean, not everything is correct 100%. It's just the level of this type of economy that is practiced, which is important. Like, it's good to have a free economy, but like, let's say not 100%, because at the end of the day, each country, like let's say for example, an Islamic country wants to have free economy. If you want to have free economy, it means that any business can do whatever they want. So as we discussed like earlier, we said that in Islamic countries, like alcoholic drinks is forbidden. So if you are banning those businesses from trading alcoholic drinks, you're somehow controlling that economy. So you cannot say that 100% free economy is good, but it's good to have, like, let's say 90% of a free economy and 10% planned by the government. And even that 10% should be to protect the rights of people. It should not be to the it should not be only as a matter of interference. It should have a purpose. And market economies and mixed economies. Mixed economies is somehow what I just mentioned right now, which we will get to. Market economies is where decisions are largely left to the market forces, which, like, whatever the supply and demand says, that will be what is prevailing in the economy. So what matters is the interaction of supply and demand. So if the demand goes up, the prices will go up, and if the supply goes up, the prices would go down. So that will be the case in those economies. Individuals and firms are the main decision makers, not the government. The government intervention is limited, associated mainly with capitalism. Then we have the mixed economies, which have features of both market and command economies, combining state intervention and market mechanisms. Which, as I said, I think that this is one of the proper ways of running an economy. Just 1 second. Oh, we don't have electricity. Yes, of course. If there's anything, I will be in touch with you on email. And if you're having any electricity problem, that's not. I mean, that's something which is out of our hands, so no problem. I will be emailing you the slide, so don't worry about it. Then we have 5 types of legal systems, which, if you remember previous session, we discussed the 3 main ones. But now it's just mentioning 2 others, but these 2 others are not that important. It's just a matter of what is there in the book. But in practice, it's the first 3, which we discussed in the previous session, which is the common law as practiced in like British countries and countries that were basically colonies of the U.S. Of the Britain. Like, let's say Australia, for example, or India, or Scotland, for example. They all practice the English common law, the Commonwealth states. Yes. Then we have the Roman civil law, which is somehow practiced in almost all other countries that are not practicing the common law. And at the end, we have the Sharia law, or the religious law, which is practiced in Islamic countries like, let's say, Saudi Arabia or Iran, or I think even Afghanistan, for example. Then you have the socialist and the mixed system. Of course, the mixed system, again, it's, as you can see from the name, it's like, for example, if you have a mixture of religious law and, like, let's say, civil law. Well, that will be the case of mixed system. So, however, that's not really the case. Like, even if asked in your exam, if I ask you about the different types of legal system, you don't need to mention all 5. These are the main 3, and these are the 3 that you can answer, and you can keep in your mind, because the rest of the 2 is not that important. We're just going to see the example of the countries that fall under each of these categories practicing these legal systems. For common law, as I mentioned, Australia, Ireland, New Zealand, UK, Canada, US, India, Pakistan. As you can see, these are all countries that were somehow colonies of the US, of the British. Then you have the civil law, which is much of the Western Europe and Latin America. So practically speaking, it's almost like all other countries that are not practicing common law, and of course the Sharia law. Then you have the Turkey and Japan in Asia, and Mexico in South America, in Central America, sorry. Then you have the Sharia law, which is in the Middle East and North Africa, and few countries in Asia, which we gave the example of, let's say, Saudi Arabia and Iran, for example. We have the primarily socialist law, which they are very much like civil law. They also fall under civil law as well. But as per this diagram, it's mentioned under the name of socialist law, which is like Russia, China, Cuba. And you have the mixed system, which is much of the Eastern Europe and Philippines and Puerto Rico. Well, to some extent, if you see, other than the English common law, I think that almost all other countries are mixed systems, because you don't have such thing as 100% Sharia law. You don't see even countries like Saudi Arabia and Iran enforcing 100% the religious law, because it's not possible as of what is going on in today's world. So to some extent, they are practicing other legal systems as well. So in this case, you can say that there is no country that is practicing 100% Sharia law. and to some extent they're all mixed systems. The common law is the legal system that originates in England and spread to Australia, Canada, US, and other former members of the British Commonwealth, known as the case law. If you remember, we discussed all these in the previous session, so this session will be a good revision for you, because this will be important for your exam and also in your later on business life, because it's really important for you to become familiarized with the different legal systems in the world and where they actually came from. It's pretty interesting as well. As we discussed, and if you remember, we said that the English common law, it's not written law like the civil law. It's not on paper. It all has to do with case laws. It has to do with different cases that happened in the past and the different decisions that is made by the judges. And these cases are referred to even today. So if you go to court for a case that the similar case has happened 50 years ago, and the judge 50 years ago gave, for example, this XYZ decision, that same XYZ decision will be implied today as well. So there is no solid law, and they purely refer to what happened in the past, which the legal term for this will be precedent. Precedent will be like when you are referring to something from the past. The basis of common law is tradition, past practices, and legal precedents set by courts via interpretations of statutes, legislation, and past rulings. As you can see, the past rulings is what I was referring to, as what the judges have held previously. Judges have much power to interpret laws based on the circumstances of individual cases. Thus, common law is relatively flexible because it's up to the judge to make the decision. It's not only that one or two lines of law that has to be strictly implemented. The judge has the power to somehow interpret that law and even manipulate that law in favor of the resolution of that case, of that specific case. You have the civil law, which is which, as I said, is written down, and it's originated from the Romans. That's why it's called the Roman civil law as well. It's found in France, Germany, Italy, Japan, Turkey, and much of Latin America. It's based on all the inclusive system of laws that have been codified. Codified means written down and clearly written by the legislative bodies. So if you go to one of these countries and if you ask them for example, the law books, or if you ask them for what is the law, like give me the book that has all the, let's say, contract law, or let's say about the criminal law, they have it all written down on paper. Whereas if you do the same in Commonwealth countries, they will only be able to give you books that have different cases in them and what the courts have held. They don't have anything as a set of rules. A key difference between civil law and common law is that common law is mainly judicial in origin and it's based on courts and it is made in the courts. Whereas for the civil law, it's mainly legislative in origin and it's based on laws passed by the legislature. So the legislature will be the, let's say, the General Assembly or the Parliament that makes the law, whereas in common law, it is the judiciary system that makes the law. So this may be a question in your exam, that what is the key difference between civil law and common law, and you have to be able to explain this. Well, you can see the differences also breaking down into this diagram, which is also very helpful for you to study in your exam as well. The differences in, let's say, ownership of intellectual property. In civil law, it's determined by registration. In common law, it's determined by prior use. About enforcing agreements, let me just tell you this in brackets. You don't need to know this for the exam because this is just very detailed part of this law. Like if I ask you about the differences, of course these are differences as well, but what I want you to explain is only this part. However, this is just for extra information. Then enforcing agreements, when it comes to enforcing agreement, as per the civil law, commercial agreements become enforceable only if property is notarized or registered. However, in common law, proof of agreement is sufficient for enforcing contracts. If you can see until now, even if you continue with 10 different legal issues, and if you want to compare between the civil law and common law, all of them have one common feature. In common law in general, what matters is if you are able to prove something to the court, okay? Whereas in civil law, it doesn't matter if you can prove it or not. It has to be on paper. You can see, it says in civil law for the ownership, it has to be by registration. Enforcing agreement, it has to be enforceable only if property is notarized or registered. So it has to be on paper. So everything has to be on paper. Whereas for common law, that's not the case. As long as you're able to prove something to the court. I'll just give you this extra example, which I'm sure that many of you guys know as well, which may seem unfair. I think that this is one of the disadvantages in common law. If a crime happens in a country with common law jurisdiction, let's say, for example, if someone kills someone in the United States, okay, even if the proofs and everything shows that he is guilty, however, he goes to the court and he is able to have a good lawyer and he's able to prove himself that he is not guilty, the court will not hold him guilty, even if he's a murderer 100%. Which this is unfair. I mean, if the evidence is there, if the proof is there, then that should be enough. It doesn't matter, even if he is able to convince the judge, he still should be held guilty. So that's the case about the civil law and common law. Then you have the Sharia law, or the religious law, which is strongly influenced by religious beliefs, ethical codes, and moral values viewed as mandated by a supreme being. Of course, it is enforced from a supreme being as well. Most important religious legal systems are based on Hindu, Jewish, and Islamic law. Islamic laws spell out norms of behavior regarding political, economic, banking. Before I just continue with this, of course, we don't have much of Hindu religious law, like a country which is practicing the Hindu legal system. And of course, the Jewish part, we don't want to get into it because, let's say, political issues. And so that's why I only refer to the Sharia law when it comes to the religious law. And even in many books, they don't even mention this as religious law. Even if you remember in the previous slide, it was mentioned Sharia law. Islamic law spells out norms of behavior regarding political, economic, banking, contracts, marriage, and other forms of social and business issues, which we also gave the example of Islamic banking. Islamic banking is a result of the implications of religious law. The Socialist Law is founded mainly in China, former Soviet Union, and few states in Africa. It's based on civil law. If you remember, I told you that it's mostly related to civil law. Well, this is the explanation, and that's why I said that in your mind, do not confuse yourself. There's three major legal systems. There is the common law, civil law, and the Sharia law. Because the socialist law as well, it's somehow the civil law with elements of socialist principles. So you can say that this is also a mixed law as well, because it's civil law plus some social principles that emphasize the state ownership of property, state rights to take precedence over individuals. And it tends toward loose treatment of property and intellectual property rights. Of course, the socialist system, whether it's legal system or it's political system, it's somehow, as we discussed, it's somehow to the favor of the society as a whole, and not individuals. Well, as per Mr. Khalakiyar, you're saying that we have. Okay. Are you willing to explain this? Because that will be an interesting topic. We can discuss this. I can turn on your microphone. Okay, Mr. Khalakiyar.
Yes, sir. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Okay. Can you explain to us that why you're saying that we have these 5 kinds of law?
Sorry, sir. I will explain you next class. But just I know about the name. I will explain on next class. Okay.
Okay, that would be great. Please do so, because that can be an interesting topic for our session, and we can discuss it.
Just you have studied in our first semester of second class in economic faculty. We have studied 5 kind of law: German law, Indian and Chinese law, common law, civil law, and Islamic law. Just we have, I think, around of the world.
Okay. Just to explain something in very short, because I don't want to prevent you from your explanations, and I want to hear your explanations for sure. But just to give a small explanation to you and the other students as well. Like when you say Indian and Chinese law, and at the same time you say common law, this itself creates a small problem, because common law, it does refer to countries like Commonwealth countries, which India falls under as one of them. Sorry, I'm just going to mute your microphone because it was too loud. Because you may explain each country's legal system separately, and it does make sense. Like, even though, for example, we categorize Iran and Saudi Arabia under the Sharia law, but you can at the same time explain the Iranian law separately and Saudi Arabian law separately, because they, at the end of the day, their legal system, it's not 100% the same. So I do understand that, for example, even though if Germany is, like, let's say, a civil, if German law is the same as a civil law, I understand if you still have different explanations for the German law separately, because even if the same number of countries are falling under the under the category of one legal system, they still have their own separate differences, and that's understandable. But you cannot say that these are different legal types. In terms of types, they are the same. However, they do have their differences as well. Not sure if my explanation was clear, but it's okay. At the same time, as I said, I do not want my explanations to prevent you from explaining your point, because that can be an interesting topic, and I do want to hear it from you. So inshallah, in next session, I'll be looking forward to hear your explanations for these different types. Okay, actors in political and legal systems. The government or the public sector is the most important actor operating at federal and local levels. Of course, the government, as I said, the power in each country, it falls under 3 different categories, which is the administrative branch, which is the legislative branch, and the judiciary. And each of these 3 branches, they have their own set of duties and responsibilities when it comes to their legal system. Like, if we want to simplify it, we would say that the legislative branch, we're talking about civil law, the legislative branch, they create the rules and regulations. The administrative branch, they carry out these rules and regulations, and the judiciary, they enforce them. Whereas in the common law, for example, the judiciary, they make the law and they enforce the law, and the legislative, it still creates laws, but this power of making law has to be specifically given by the judiciary. It's a bit complicated, and we don't want to get into the details because explaining this too much will be in. I mean, you have to learn that in your law course, but you can just keep it in mind to this extent that the legislative branch in a Commonwealth country, they should have they should be appointed by the judiciary for some specific rule. Like, all right, let me give you the example. It's like they give them the power to make laws, let's say for the driving rules and regulations, for driving in like the traffic rules and regulations. If this is specifically granted to the parliament, then they have the power to make the rules and regulations. And of course, the administrative branch, they are similar to what is there in the civil law. They have to just carry out the rules and regulations. That's all. So the government or the public sector is the most important actor operating at federal and local levels. Supranational agencies such as the World Trade Organizations and the United Nations and the World Bank. So these are the superior legal systems. So if a country is part of the United Nations, it has to and it must follow the rules and regulations that are imposed by the United Nations. It must modify its internal rules as per the United Nations. Why? Because it's a member of the United Nations and it has accepted to be part of the United Nations. So it has to apply and basically follow all the rules and regulations that are imposed by the UN to its member states. And of course, the same applies to World Bank, and the same applies to World Trade Organization or any other supranational agency that may exist. Or we have even the smaller versions of the supranational agencies, which is called the regional agencies. Like, for example, let's say the European Union or the OIC, for example, for the Organization of Islamic Countries. We have the regional trade organizations such as the European Union, which we just mentioned, or the North American Free Trade Agreement, which will deal with countries in North America. Then we have the special interest groups, such as labor union and environmental groups. Well, this becomes within the borders of a country. The above three, which we discussed, the above two, sorry, this one and this one, it has to be beyond the borders. It's outside the country. And when we come to the special interest groups, it's within the borders, which is like labor unions, for example. And local competing firms oppose foreign firms and lobby their governments accordingly. Well, it's saying that these people also play active roles in legal systems. Okay, I'm not gonna go through the diagrams anymore because we still have a few more slides to go. And because the diagrams, they are not important for you for the exam, it's just for extra information, but please do go through them because I don't want to waste the class time. We only have 30 more minutes to go. Then we have country risk produced by the political system, the government takeover of corporate assets. Okay, this is when this is part of that country risk where the government comes into play and it takes over the corporate assets, and that's why that risk actually exists. One of these risks is the risk of confiscation. Well, the confiscation will be the seizure of foreign assets without compensation. So basically, they take that foreign assets away without paying any remedies or any compensation. For example, the Venezuelan president Hugo Chavez confiscated a major oil field owned by a French firm, Total. So basically, that foreign asset has come to your country, and they are running their business, and at the same time, due to something that happens, this happened actually a lot with Iran after the Islamic Revolution. I mean, for your information, like At the time of Shah, for example, Iran had a contract to purchase many airplanes and even warplanes as well, war jets. But after the revolution, the United States, they confiscated. I mean, they took the money and they said that, okay, since we don't have any further political relations with Iran, and that's it. They just locked the money. Not only they did not cancel the contract and return the money, they just kept the money. So that is an example of confiscation. Then you have expropriation, which is the seizure of corporate assets with compensation. So the difference is, for example, you have your business there, they come and they take it, however, they pay you the remedy, they pay you that compensation. So it's like you as a foreign company, you are forced to sell your assets. It's not taken from you. I mean, it's not taken from you without a remedy, like what you have in confiscation. It's taken from you, but they will give you the payment for that. Then you have the nationalization, which the government takes over of an entire industry with or without compensation. Which we have that example again in Iran, for example, for the oil nationalization, or we have in Japan for its post company, because Japan's post company was it used to be a huge company, and in fact it was the biggest example of privatization as well, because it was the biggest company in the world that became privatized. Well, as of I think 2006, 2007. I'm not sure if after that there was another company that beat the record. However, as an example of nationalization, we can see that in 2006, the government of Bolivia, they nationalized much of the country's oil and gas industry. So the same thing happened in Iran, but of course in I think in the 1960s at the time of Mossadegh. And you have the privatization, which we gave the example. It's a selling of state-owned enterprises to private interests. This privatization is practiced a lot in the transition economies. If you guys remember, when we were giving the different types of economies in session 3-4, we discussed the transition economies. Transition economies are the countries that are moving to privatization. They are moving towards an open economy. So privatization is pretty much practiced in those transitional economies. Okay, then we have the country risk, which is produced by the legal system. So even the legal system itself, it can create and it can contribute to the country risk, which of course that has to do with also the enforcement of these legal systems as well. The foreign investment law, it affects the type of entry strategy firms choose, as well as their operations and performance. So it does. So it is an important factor when it comes for those international firms when they want to choose which country to move to. One of the things that they will be evaluating will be the legal system of that country. The nations impose restrictions on inward FDI, which is foreign direct investment, such as Japan's large retail store law or the U.S. and Dubai ports world. So, if you remember, we also gave the example that we said that some countries, they have that strict legal system that prevents the multinational company to move out the profit that it has made. And as per the rules and regulations, that MNC is forced to reinvest its money in the same country in order to be able to stay in the host country. And controls on operating forms and practices. It affects the firm's production, its marketing, and distribution activities. Basically, its operations. For example, China requires market entry via joint venture. This is something which you guys remember when we were in 2-3 sessions ago when we were discussing the different types of globalization and how a company can become globalized. So, as an example, which we have here, a company that wants to move into China, as per the rules and regulations of China, they cannot just go there and run and establish their business individually and independently. They will have to go and become a joint venture with the local company. And if you remember, we also said that one of the advantages of this would be that level of risk will reduce, because if you are a company and you want to move to a new country, you are not 100% familiar with that culture and with the legal system and with the political system that exists in that country. So when you become a joint venture with a local company, you are somehow transferring the risk and reducing your risk and controlling your risk by becoming a partner with the local company that is 100% familiar with the environment, with the local environment of that country. Country risk produced by the legal system is the continuation of what we discussed. Marketing and distribution laws, which it determines which practices are allowed in advertising, and the promotion and distribution. Laws may restrict TV advertising aimed at children. We can see this example in our countries because I think all of us are from Islamic countries. So one of the limitations that is imposed on the marketing and distribution aspect of the companies by our local legal system is that they are not allowed to advertise alcoholic drinks openly in the market. Even in places like Dubai, where you can legally purchase alcoholic drinks, but the shops that do sell these drinks, they are not allowed to have open displays, and they are not allowed to sell to Muslim customers. So you have to have an ID card that shows that you are not a Muslim, and that will be the only case that they will be selling you the alcoholic drinks. So this is a limitation that is imposed by the legal system of the country. Laws regarding the income repatriation. It limits the amount of net income or dividends that firms can bring back to the home country. We just discussed this when we said that some countries they do have the limitation of the money that you can transfer back to your country, to your home country. You have the environmental laws, the laws that somehow limit the businesses in terms of harming the environment, because some businesses, when they move and when they become globalized, they run, let's say, plants and manufacturing plants, and these plants, to some extent, they do create environmental harms, and there are legal systems that part of the legal systems, of course, will limit those environmental issues. They are intended to preserve the natural resources and combat pollution and ensure health and safety. For example, in Germany, firms must follow strict recycling regulations. So if you are an international firm that wants to expand your business to Germany, you must consider this issue of recycling, and you must have a proper forecast about this if you want to succeed. Country risk arising from home country legal environment. So what we discussed until here was about the risk in the host country, in the country where you're moving your business to. However, this is the country risk arising from the home country legal environment. Like, for example, you have the extraterritoriality, which is very difficult to pronounce, application of home country laws to the other countries. For example, the European Union has pursued Microsoft for perceived monopolistic practices. So they will not allow these. They will not allow a country like a company like Microsoft to become a monopoly. It means that it will not be 100% free economy, because a free economy, it becomes inevitable. Like, for example, if Microsoft moves into the economy and there is no competitor with Microsoft, eventually it will become a monopoly even if you don't want to. However, it's saying that in countries like Europe, if this company moves there, and even if there is a smaller competitor for Microsoft, they will give more value to that in order to stop a company like Microsoft to become a monopoly in their country. And of course, it does make sense because sometimes it becomes a security issue in those countries, especially when it comes to technology products. When you're moving to a country, the host country will limit you to some extent because it will become a security issue. Like let's say if companies who are producing, like let's say telephones and mobile phones or wireless systems, their products can become dual-use products as well. They can be used as in weapons and other basically goods that may be dangerous to the host country. So the host country has the power to limit these companies to some extent in order to protect itself. You have the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which was passed in 1977, and it made it legal to offer bribes to foreign parties. But the definition of a bribe is unclear. Harms U.S. interests because foreign competitors are not constrained. So again, this will be part of the legal issues to explain that sometimes the transparency in the law is not there, and that law becomes open to interpretation. So so basically, a single law can be passed, and since it's not transparent and it's not clear, every party has its own understanding of the law, and that's what it's saying here. It's saying that the definition of bribe is unclear because it doesn't make sense. How can a law be passed and it makes such things such as a bribe legal? It's impossible. So for sure, the definition of bribe must have been something different, and there's basically a misuse of a term. Accounting and reporting laws. This comes into play especially in countries where they have the tax issues, which we'll get to the examples and later on after going through the slide. It differs widely around the world, and the examples of it is the physical asset valuation, where in Canada and the US use historical costs. Some Latin American countries use inflation-adjusted market value. Well, I'll give you the reason. Like sometimes a very simple one, which is not a business example. I'll give you an individual example. You know, like when you want to insure your car, in order to pay less for your insurance policy, if they ask you how much your car is, well, even if it's $50,000 US, we would say, okay, it's only $30,000. So they give you a cheaper policy. And when it comes to claiming from your insurance, you try to increase the cost. Like for example, if they say, okay, of course they do not leave it open to the individuals. However, I'm talking about what is the interest of the individuals. Like everyone wants to pay less and gain more. So when it comes to your insurance, you want to bring down the value of your car in the beginning to pay less. However, if God forbid you get into an accident and you want to claim for it from your insurance company, you will try to maximize the level of that cost so you can claim more from the insurance company. So this is something that's happening with the valuation. In terms of businesses, of course, it's different, and it also brings the taxation into play because you will have to pay taxes as per your assets and as per your income, depending on different countries. Because some countries, they impose taxes on income and some they impose taxes on your assets. So it's saying that Canada and the US use historical costs, and countries like Latin America, they use costs that are adjusted by the inflation and changed by the inflation. You have the uncollectible accounts allowances. In the US, you have this thing, but in France, Spain, and South Africa, you don't have the uncollectible accounts allowance. Research and development costs are expensed as incurred in most of the world, which is the R&D cost. and they're capitalized in South Korea and Spain, and other countries like Belgium, Malaysia, and Italy. They use both conventions. Sorry if I'm moving a bit too fast, because we still have 3 more slides to go. Then we have the transparency in financial reporting, which is really important to become transparent, because in some countries they can get that business into legal issue. Like you have the the recent example of Dolce and Gabbana in Italy. They did not clearly announce and report their assets and their income, and they tried to somehow manipulate the accounts. And when the government of Italy they found out, they gave them a harsh fine, which is in billions actually. And if you want, you can just do some research for your extra information. But that was the example of today's world. So the transparency refers to the degree to which the firms regularly reveal and announce their substantial financial and accounting information, usually to the government entities and the local taxing authorities. The timing and transparency of financial reporting vary widely around the world. Of course, some countries they take annual reporting, some quarterly, and it depends on different countries. Then you have the Act of Sarbanes-Oxley, which was passed in 2002, and it promotes the greater transparency in accounting practices. So it forces and enforces, and it requires the companies to become more transparent. The cost of compliance is high. So if you want to become more transparent, it will become more costly for you, and it discourages the foreign firms from listing or transacting extensively in the U.S. because this act was passed in the U.S. So as we said in the earlier slides, we said that the rules and regulations, sometimes they become too tough, and the toughness of these rules and regulations are not in the favor of the companies that are operating their businesses. So it's not really to their interest anymore. Ethical values and practices. The ethics, it refers to the moral behavior of the people or firms or government. Issues often arise or may be exacerbated by deficiencies in legal systems. Well, of course, the ethical values, it has to do with the cultural norms in every country, and it has to be respected. We do have the ethics in almost all sciences, and even the international business is not an exception. Of course, the ethical values must be abided by, and it must be respected for all the international companies and all the companies that are going global. Corruption typically involves the use of bribery. Like, for example, bribery itself is something which is unethical. So if you're a company, especially an international company, and you're practicing bribery, that's unethical, and it's against what we're just discussing right now. So typically involves the use of bribery and fraud to achieve business goals, most common in developing economies. Of course, it's because developed economies, they already have mature set of rules and regulations that strictly limit any corruption. So that's why you rarely see corruption happening in developed economies. We cannot say it's 100% it doesn't exist. Of course, it does exist, and we do hear it in different financial news every day. However, the level of the corruption is different, and it mostly happens in developing economies or even less developed economies. Contract law, which is a subsidiary of law, and it's limited to the rules and regulations of contract. It says that local contract is a factor which falls into 5 steps. 1, sale of goods or services. 2, distribution by foreign intermediaries. 3, licensing and franchising. 4, the foreign direct investment. And 5, joint ventures. So the contract law part of any country's legal system, it addresses these 5 different types. And so if you face any disputes, like for example, as a result of your joint venture, if you face any disputes with any, let's say, authority of local authority in terms of the foreign direct investment or the licensing and franchising or whatever, these all fall in under the contract law. So this is why I said it's important. Like if you are a business and you are starting a franchise in another country, and while you want to start the operations of your franchising company, you face a problem with the local authorities and you want to go to court, or you want to basically hire a legal advisor, you as the manager of the company, you should at least understand that this dispute is a result of a contract law issue. So it will be addressed as a matter of a contract law. And the protection through legal contracts, which is important, and I gave you the explanation that every contract they should have the issue when it comes to arbitration. We'll just go through the slide. It says that a legal contract spells out the rights and applications of each party. This is something that we all understand. That's what's there in the contract. It gives you the legal rights and obligations of the seller as one party and the buyer as the other party. And especially important when the relationships goes further and beyond like two parties. Like even like two parties, when they have a dispute, it's easier to resolve that dispute. But when that contract involves more than two parties, it becomes a bit complicated. There's three approaches for resolving contractual disputes. So if as a result of contract disputes arise, there's three ways that we can resolve the fight and the dispute. One is the conciliation. It is the least adversarial method, which is a formal process of negotiation that aims to resolve differences in a friendly manner, common in China. So I won't say it's only common in China, it's common everywhere in the world, because number one priority for every party would be to resolve that issue by negotiations in a friendly manner. And of course, if that was not a proper resolution, and if the dispute does not reach a resolution, they move to another process, which is the arbitration, where a neutral third party, which we gave the example of, let's say, International Chamber of Commerce in Paris, hears both sides of a case and decides in favor of one party or the other based on an objective assessment of the facts. So they hear the parties, they act as a court, and their final decision will be acceptable to all parties or both parties if it's only two. And or else you have the litigation. Litigation will be the last step, which is the most adversarial approach, and it occurs when one party files a lawsuit against another. This happens in the U.S. Like when they sue each other, that's like litigation, which again, as I said, it happens in the United States. So so we reached the end of today's session, and I hope it was useful for everyone. And if there is not any questions, we can just the exam will actually it will not be group, it will be individuals. You will have a set of multiple choice questions. Of course, multiple choice, also true, false, and you will have to explain some questions, because some questions I will ask you and I will need you to explain it for me. And like I gave you one of the examples of the questions today. I'm not going to say 100% it will be in the exam, but it will be about the differences of, like, let's say, for example, common law and the civil law. And you will have to write like few lines for it. Of course, I will give the exact instructions, like in our last session, However, if you do want to have a proper preparation for the exam, I suggest that you do go through the slides, and you do, if you don't, like, if you haven't taken notes of the examples we discussed in class, that's okay, that's not a problem. At least try to find some examples on the internet, like you can search different websites, like for every point, because on the short answer, when I ask you questions, for every question, I will need you to give me an explanation as well. Like, if we are if we are discussing the question about the civil law and the common law, like, other than explaining each law, you will need to give me an example of which countries are actually practicing it. Or whatever question that I ask you, I prefer you come up with an example. So just make sure you do go through the slides, you study them well, and you do have examples for each case. Well, I have sent all the slides to everyone after each session, so I'm sure that you should be having it. In case if anyone does not have the slides, because I'm sure that all of you guys have all the slides until today, of course, except the one which we just presented, and I will be sending you later. But other than that, I'm sure you have all the slides. If anyone did not receive them, please send me an email. I will send it to you. Okay, just send me an email. I will reply to your email with the slides. That's not a problem, because I don't want to keep sending it to everyone. So because everyone has their slides, whoever doesn't have it, just send me a separate email. I will reply to you with all the slides. If your question is for the submission of the exam, if you mean, the exam will be on a day. I mean, it will be coordinated by the university. I mean, I will send them the question, and they will be the one who will conduct the exam. So I will not be there. I mean, and I will not be the one who's conducting the exam. I will just send the questions to them. Okay, so thank you very much for listening, everyone, and I'll see you guys in the next sessions.